Welcome back to Kobayashi Island. This is episode 12, and we're going to start off this episode right away by deleting all these roads and train station and completely terraforming this area that's kind of next to the downtown in sort of the shadow of this big hill. And I talked about why I'm doing this in the last episode, but basically it felt weird to me having this little area next to downtown, and it felt weird having big buildings there. It felt weird having little buildings there. I was trying all sorts of stuff, and I eventually decided that what was going to happen here was we would be making a dam and a reservoir for the farming areas that are going to be kind of nearby here. So the general idea is that Kobayashi Island is pretty lush and can grow a lot of food, a lot of its own food. So in order to do that, it needs to have water, and a lot of it. And imagine it rains here a decent amount, but it's not a very big area, so they need to have a place to sort of collect and store water when it rains. So that's why there's going to be a dam and a reservoir. I mean, the main function of this reservoir is to store water and siphon it off to the farms as needed, but I also put in sort of like an electrical plant so that overflow water that isn't being stored and just needs to be released in order to make it so that the dam doesn't completely overflow. That water goes through the center part of the dam and isn't diverted, and that will generate electricity for the city. So that's the water that kind of leads down this river here next to this train station I'm building, and kind of leads out into the ocean. It's sort of just like if there's too much water, it lets it out there. This train station is kind of the only thing I really messed with over here in this area, which is still pretty untouched. You know, this is part of the area that I really didn't know what to do with, and I just sort of made it a lot smaller. And I think what's going to happen here, probably next episode, is just filling this out with kind of generic buildings and maybe one spot that's sort of unique and has a specific purpose, but for the most part it's just going to be kind of like a little bit of overflow for the downtown. So now you kind of see me starting to work on this terraforming in order to make this upper reservoir, and I just placed down the dam itself. There's a lot of different ways to make dams in city skylines. Some people have made some really amazing dams that don't use the vanilla version. I mean, there's kind of a number of ways. You can either do it with sort of like a lot of props and stuff like tunnel blocks and things like that, to make the structure of it. And then the other way to kind of do it is to terraform it and then use the surface painter tool and paint the ground to be concrete and just sort of make the ground kind of look like a dam. This dam, it's going to be a big part of the city, obviously, but it's not going to be a centerpiece. It's not going to be a mega dam or like the Hoover Dam or like the Three Gorges Dam or anything like that. It's just kind of like a little version of a dam. So I didn't want to go crazy and have like a bunch of runoffs for the water, and I wasn't trying to go crazy with this and spend forever on just the dam. So I decided to use the vanilla version, and the upside of that is that obviously it generates power as well, which is nice. And then I kind of did a couple, add-on things to make it just a little bit more unique than only the vanilla version. So I placed down some water pumps, which, in terms of how they look, the point is that they pull water out of the reservoir and pump it down these pipes down the side of the hill. And then those will siphon into sort of like a canal system that will go around the farms and water the farms. But the function of those water pumps is that they'll actually pull water out of the reservoir for just the city's water system in general. I'm also turning this into sort of like a recreation center a little bit. There's like a pier. You see me putting that down now, and a place where people can put their boats in the water, bring their boats up and to spend a day on the reservoir, going around fishing or water skiing or whatever. And then there's also going to be sort of like a trail that leads to a beach, like more like a public, secluded beach. So I'm imagining this whole area up here is pretty nice and kind of a place for the citizens to come and relax on like the weekends or something. Kind of in close proximity to the city, but a little bit outside of it. This will kind of be like a residential area, I'm imagining, around the dam in the areas that aren't right up against the mountain. So people will live over here and maybe have private access to the lake, you know, their own little dock or pier and their own boats. And I'm imagining this is sort of like one of the nicer areas of the city. I'm going to put some of the larger house assets that I have around here and give them big yards and a lot of area for each property, and make this upper area eventually into kind of like the Beverly Hills of Kobayashi Island. What you see me building now is, first of all, the pipes that pull water out of the reservoir and into the canal system for the farms. And then also the power station that collects electricity from the turbines inside the actual dam and converts that into electricity and sends that electricity around the city. Part of this electrical station is I put down some oil storage, which isn't obviously the right thing to put down there, but the tanks themselves seem to look right to me in terms of like, imagine a place like this would store some water or treat some water or have tanks full of phosphorus or something to help make the crops, you know, grow better, to kind of inject chemicals into the water for the farms, and sort of like a big parking area. And this is kind of maybe for the employees to park in, and then a bunch of like transformers, like electrical transformers, to kind of deal with getting the electricity and sending it out to the rest of the city. So what I just did there was place down, I used the parallel roads tool, which is amazing, and place down 3 roads next to each other. And you can change the settings in the parallel roads tool to have one of the roads be higher or lower than another one. So I put the central road much lower. What that kind of does is you can use the parallel roads tool to make roads that serve as kind of like forced terraforming, and this makes it so that there's very smooth, straight edges that I can use as the sides of the canals, as opposed to like just like lowering the terrain in order to make the canals, because usually how that ends up is very jagged edges. So that's a cool little trick, using the parallel lines tool or just using roads in general to terraform in order to get much smoother edges. But it does have to be that two-way plain street road so that you can use the surface painter tool to change the colors so that it's not asphalt. See me now placing down a bunch of rocks and trees and kind of getting together sort of like a look, and you know, just making all this like steep hill area look a little bit nicer and more less vanilla-y. I'm going to be doing a ton of that in this episode, placing down trees and rocks, especially when I get up to the beach area up in the reservoir. And I'm not sure if I'm going to show all of it. I might skip around so you don't have to watch me place down every single tree. I think that might be a little bit more interesting. I think this area directly around these canals are pretty much where it's going to start turning into residential areas and farming areas. So I'm kind of planning now that that's already going to get a little bit less dense, and the land is going to be a little less valuable. There's going to be some more open areas because of that. I'm generally kind of excited to be doing that because a lot of times when I build cities, I'll build the downtown and I'll finish the downtown and I'll have spent all my time building dense areas, which are sort of what I find to be a lot of times the most fun to build. And then I'll start building the low density areas and get bored really quick, and my city will sort of from a distance, especially when you look at the dense areas, kind of look finished. But in reality, it's not. There's not nearly enough low density areas. So I'm excited to be doing it this way, where I've built a little bit of downtown and a little bit of the low density areas, and to kind of bop around back and forth, do some low density, go back to some high density. I think it'll allow me to not finish out a particular style of area and always be able to go back, to and build more high density when I'm feeling like it, and then switch back and go do some more low density when I'm feeling it, and not be just like, okay, all the high density stuff is done at this point, so I'm just going to be building low density for the next couple weeks. It's more like I can kind of bounce around and do whatever I want to. I think that's a good way to sort of build. For me in particular, some people might not have that problem, but for me, I get bored of the place once the downtown's kind of done. So I'm sort of saving a lot of downtown for a little bit later. So you see me now kind of building this beach area. In the terraforming menu, there's an option to add sand. So that's kind of what I did. Was I did a little sand, putting down some lifeguard huts, some assets for a national park from the Park Life DLC, and kind of trying to make this area like attractive to tourists. Later on in this episode, I build a residential neighborhood right below the reservoir. And in that area, some of the larger houses have their own little private beach and little private dock. And I think that's a really cool sort of aesthetic to neighborhoods, having like houses that border the water and have their own ways to get down to the lake and park boats and stuff. So I think I'm going to do that in a few other places. You saw me just place down a couple sort of dead-end areas. It's another thing where there's a few different ways to make cul-de-sacs like that. And it really took me a long time of playing this game to figure out how to make proper cul-de-sacs and sort of the different techniques of doing it. What you saw me do there was I used the alleyway, which I've been using as the normal street for the most part, and then doing a little bit of like a much larger street, like a 2 or 3 lanes in each direction street, and then using the Move It mod to pull that street like very close to the alleyway, the node at the end of that street. And what that does is it creates kind of like a cul-de-sac shape, and then you can use the ploppable asphalt to cover up the lines of the road and just make it look like an empty cul-de-sac. So that's one option for making a cul-de-sac. Another option is you can use like a one-way alley or a one-way street, and then have there be like an island in the center of the cul-de-sac, and you just make a circle with the street. I used to live on a cul-de-sac that had a little island in the center of it like that, but for some reason when I do that in the game, it doesn't really look as realistic. And then the other way you can do it is sometimes I make streets using the type of road that's the same exact color as the paintable pavement, when you use the surface painter. With those streets, you can kind of, I did it over by the Old Town a bunch. You can kind of have them dead end in a certain area and then paint the pavement in a shape that's kind of like a cul-de-sac, where the street isn't making a loop and the street itself isn't cul-de-sac shaped, but the pavement that you painted on around it is. And so that's kind of like the third way to make cul-de-sacs. So almost done here, just finishing placing these last few trees and bushes and rocks and whatnot. Next episode, I think I'm gonna continue focusing on this area over here, maybe do some farms, maybe finish out that little strip of downtown area, and so until next time.